Okay, let's unpack this. We often talk about criminal organizations that, dominate a city. But what happens when local drug violence, the kind of thing you read about in the paper, suddenly hits? Well, it hits the level of international
It
espionage.
becomes a national security threat.
Exactly.
And that pivot, that's really the core of this entire story. For most of us, organized crime means drug dealing, extortion, maybe murder. But the story we're diving into today shows that the ambition of these groups can lead them directly into, the terrifying world of state-sponsored terrorism.
That's it. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the brutal world of 1980s Chicago. We're focusing specifically on a gang whose ambitions escalated so rapidly and so unexpectedly that they forced the FBI to pivot overnight from fighting the daily drug trade to preventing a major coordinated terrorist attack on American soil.
And you really have to set the scene for the listener. The early 1980s in Chicago, especially on the South Side, the city was in crisis.
A battleground.
It was a battleground. The sheer volume of heroin and cocaine flooding in wasn't just fueling individual tragedy. It was actively tearing the social fabric apart. We're talking about neighborhoods that had become tragically true war zones.
And this was all driven by the competition for drug money.
Entirely. The profits were massive and the competition was just. It was incredibly intense. The issue wasn't just individual crime anymore, it was systemic disintegration.
And when a problem gets that immense, the response has to be equally massive. That's precisely why the FBI established a highly specialized task force for organized crime and drug trade.
Right. Their mandate was to target the most violent, the most successful players operating in that environment.
And among those players, there was one name that really stood out.
Head and shoulders above the rest. The notoriously brutal, highly effective organization known as El Rukin. They were the benchmark for organized street crime at that time. They had successfully cornered the market on both violence and profit.
So when the task force was created, their primary mission, their almost singular mission, was dismantling El Rukin.
That was job one.
Let's start by just looking at the sheer scale of El Rukin's operation. This wasn't a corner gang.
No, not at all. They were interested only in wholesale, specifically cocaine and heroin, and their stated goal was absolute dominion, complete control over the entire south side of Chicago.
This was about creating a true criminal empire.
It was more than just market control. It was a total economic monopoly, and it was enforced by relentless violence. If you were a dealer attempting to operate or sell drugs anywhere within that vast El Rukin territory, you had two choices.
And only two.
You either paid deep protection money, basically a tax directly to the organization, or you faced lethal consequences. That level of ruthless efficiency cemented their reputation as the most successful and dangerous drug organization in Chicago.
So they basically professionalized street violence.
They did, to ensure business continuity. They treated murder as just a cost of doing business.
And the structure of the organization, it reflected this sort of corporate professionalized mindset. We're talking about several hundred members.
Heavily armed and incredibly disciplined. It was built, almost ironically, to be more resilient than a lot of legitimate businesses.
And at the very top of this structure, you had the leader.
Absolutely. Ruling with an iron fist, the undisputed leader, Jeff Ford. He earned his reputation through a combination of efficiency and an almost inhuman ruthlessness.
But his real genius, if you can call it that, was in his command structure.
Yes. He managed 21 distinct individuals, all holding the title of general.
21 generals, all reporting directly to him. That's a powerful, almost paranoid organizational design.
It sounds like it was designed specifically to prevent betrayal.
That's exactly the purpose it served. This network wasn't just management, it was Ford's ultimate personal protection system. The arrangement ensured that any single individual or even a small group of generals thought about challenging Ford.
Someone would talk.
Exactly. There would be 20 other people who would instantly report that challenge back to Ford. He had eyes and ears everywhere, allowing him to react instantly and decisively. His power base was impenetrable because it was insulated by ambition and, a lot of fear.
So the FBI is facing this immense, highly controlled organization, and initially they're running into a wall.
A frustrating wall.
Yeah.
In the spring of 1985, splinter groups, realizing how much money was at stake, they tried to break away and grab some of El Rukin's territory.
And this immediately led to brutal, paralyzing turf wars. The murder rate in South Chicago began to climb terrifyingly high. The FBI felt like they were just watching the city burn, completely unable to decapitate the snake.
The frustration was palpable, but then they get a break.
Thankfully, yes. The breakthrough came in May 1985, and it came from a crucial informant. They received intelligence that several El Rucan members, some wanted for serious murders, had fled the chaos in Chicago and were hiding out in Cleveland.
So they organized a joint raid with the Cleveland Police Department.
And it results in multiple key arrests. One of those arrests, though, proved to be the golden ticket that cracked the case wide open. A high-ranking former member named Anthony Sumner. Sumner was immediately isolated and brought in for interrogation. After 4 intense hours, he confessed to committing a double murder back in Chicago.
Okay, so now they have maximum leverage.
Exactly. The authorities offered him a reduced sentence, chance at freedom, but only in exchange for revealing everything he knew about the inner workings, the structure, and the operations of El Rucan.
And he took the deal.
He eventually agreed, and the revelation was just stunning.
Because at this point, the authorities had been operating under the assumption that they had at least neutralized the head of the organization.
Right. Jeff Ford, back in 1983, had been arrested for cocaine trafficking and sentenced to 13 years in a Texas prison. They figured their main problem was locked away and, largely passive.
That assumption was absolutely shattered by Sumner.
Completely shattered. He confirmed the FBI's deepest, but until then, unproven suspicion. Jeff Ford was still running the entire multi-million-dollar operation down to the tactical level, from inside his prison cell.
So he wasn't passive at all. He was the operational commander.
Yes. He contacted gang members in Chicago regularly, typically using a payphone booth within the correctional facility itself.
Wow. And the Chicago operation was perfectly designed to facilitate this.
Perfectly. Sumner detailed their central headquarters, a former cinema on the south side, which he described not just as a location, but as an absolute reinforced fortress. It was guarded constantly by rotating teams of El Rucan members.
But the truly vital detail for the FBI was the communications center.
Right. Ford's staff were structured into shifts, ensuring that personnel were there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, standing by to receive his instructions the moment he could call.
They treated his calls like communications from a king.
An absolute monarch. This revelation that the entire organization was run by telecommunication from a payphone-made wiretap evidence not just useful, but absolutely essential to dismantling the group.
So once the FBI realized that Jeff Ford's phone calls were the indispensable lifeline of El Rucan, the priority adjusted. It shifted completely.
Right. They needed to get permission for a permanent wiretap on that prison phone line. By the summer of 1985, they had the authorization they needed, and that marked the start of a massive logistical challenge.
I can imagine. It was a logistical nightmare, not just a challenge.
The Bass-Up prison where Ford was incarcerated was located near Austin, Texas. The surveillance center itself was set up roughly, 65 to 80 kilometers away?
And tapping a prison phone booth, that requires incredibly sophisticated technical work outside the facility, right? All done within the phone company's infrastructure.
All while ensuring no one in the correctional facility, especially Ford, suspected they were listening.
But when the agents finally started listening in, the excitement it turned instantly to frustration.
Yeah. They were hearing Ford speaking to his high-ranking generals in Chicago, but the conversations were fragmented, repetitive, and utterly nonsensical.
This was the organization's first major layer of operational security, their code.
An elaborate code. Agents were listening to phrases that sounded almost liturgical, but were clearly sinister. Things like, in the knowledge of the taco, of love, truth, and the perfect human.
Right. They knew intellectually that Ford and his generals were discussing large-scale, high-dollar drug deals, cocaine, heroin, money, but without the specific key.
Without that translation matrix.
They couldn't press any charges. The conversations, in a legal sense, were meaningless gibberish.
That must have been so demoralizing. Imagine having the primary evidence source right there, but not being able to interpret a single, actionable piece of information.
The code-breaking process was tedious, but this is where a brilliant piece of old-school local police work comes in. A Chicago police detective devised a truly clever, targeted interruption strategy.
Okay, so they understood the fundamental problem. They needed a real-world event, a known variable, to be immediately communicated to Ford using the code.
They needed a controlled piece of ciphertext that they could link back to a known plain text.
So the police department instructed officers to start regularly contacting gang members, specifically the ones managing the HQ, just to let them know the police were watching.
The specific plan was elegant in its simplicity. A single designated police officer paid a quick, visible visit right to the front of the El Rucan HQ, that old cinema.
Right. He spoke briefly to a member, maybe made a threatening remark, and then left immediately. The objective was simple. Would this mundane, real-world interaction be relayed to Ford in a coded form, and if so, how?
And it worked.
It worked exactly as intended. Agents monitoring the wiretap shortly thereafter overheard coded communication relating to the police presence.
And by painstakingly cross-referencing the known police presence with the fragmented speech they intercepted, they were able to nail down the meaning of one specific code word. They had their Rosetta Stone.
And the first translation, the foundation for the entire lexicon.
The code word, perfect human.
Right. It was revealed to be the operational term for a pound of marijuana.
It sounds almost comical given the surrounding violence, but that translation provided the crucial foundation for starting to build their glossary, linking that abstract language to concrete quantities of drugs.
It was a vital initial success, but cracking the entire code was still an incredibly slow process. After 2 months of intensive surveillance from Texas, the agents knew only a fraction of the gang's comprehensive operation.
And worse, they ran into a major operational setback that threatened to blind them entirely.
They realized that the Fortress headquarters had other phones, unmonitored private lines that Ford's generals were using for critical, high-stakes communication.
To truly understand the full breadth of El Rukin's plans, especially those that didn't involve the slow public prison phone, they couldn't keep listening from Texas.
No. They had to move the entire massive surveillance operation to Chicago and physically tap all communication lines in that Fortress HQ.
They needed complete visibility, and they needed to be close enough to react quickly. Remote monitoring was proving insufficient.
They realized that by missing those alternative lines, they were remaining blind to critical, perhaps the most sensitive information being shared at the gang's nerve center. The time for remote monitoring was over. They needed boots on the ground right near the gang.
So the logistical challenge of moving the entire operation was accomplished in December 1985. The surveillance post shifted from Texas to a secure, clandestine location near the El Rukin headquarters in Chicago. Agent Tom Quorum, who had painstakingly led the Texas wiretap effort, was spearheading the Chicago operation.
And he immediately ran into a familiar, demoralizing punch to the gut.
The brand new code.
A brand new code. It was a complete strategic failure for the FBI, even if it wasn't their fault. The gang had clearly caught wind of the surveillance in Texas, or maybe they just changed codes regularly as a security protocol.
Right, just to frustrate law enforcement.
Exactly. So Quorum couldn't just pick up where he left off. The slate was wiped completely clean. It's like having your opponent suddenly change languages mid-game, and now the stakes have been raised exponentially. He had to start over, painstakingly piecing together fragments hour by hour, trying to rebuild the entire glossary from scratch.
That level of frustration must have been enormous. But as Quorum immersed himself in the new chatter, he began to notice a profound and genuinely terrifying shift in the subject matter. The conversation still included the daily drug business, the normal operations, but new, alarming references were creeping in, specifically surrounding international travel. These kinds of references had been completely absent during the previous months of monitoring in Texas.
He was meticulously charting these new geographical locations. They were hearing routine mentions of New York for drug logistics, but then, far more alarmingly, the name Libya started popping up consistently in the discussions between Ford and his generals.
And this immediately introduced urgent existential national security implications.
Of course. You have to remember the context of the mid-1980s. Libya, under the command of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, was a pariah state. It was widely and strongly suspected by the United States government of actively supporting and sponsoring international terrorism globally.
So the FBI understood the gravity immediately. If a heavily armed, highly organized drug gang operating right out of Chicago's South Side was somehow forming operational or financial ties with a foreign state sponsor of terrorism.
That wasn't just a crime problem anymore.
No. That constituted an extreme danger to U.S. national security and domestic stability. The drug case had just morphed into a counterterrorism emergency.
Agent Quorum, spending days synthesizing the fragmented, coded conversations, eventually put the pieces together on the true gravity of what he was hearing.
What was the horrifying central conclusion that finally galvanized the entire task force into realizing the full scale of the danger?
He determined that El Rukin members were actively discussing preparations for a meeting with a Libya representative, And this representative was supposed to financially support a specific terrorist attack.
Which was?
The bombing of an airplane operating within the United States.
Oh.
They were actively seeking state sponsorship to commit mass murder on U.S. infrastructure.
That is a pivot point that takes the organization from drug trafficking kingpins to international conspirators overnight. Corm knew he couldn't handle this alone.
No, he immediately informed the U.S. attorney, confirming their worst fears. A local drug investigation had unexpectedly uncovered a possible, potentially imminent terrorist plot targeting American citizens.
So at that critical moment, the drug task force, while still supporting, they had to cede the lead to the experts.
Right, to the people trained for this kind of threat. The FBI Counterterrorism Task Force, led by Special Agent Ned Hamara, was immediately brought in. Their urgent mandate was to take over the surveillance, validate Corm's alarming findings, and determine the exact nature, scope, and timeline of the threat.
But the original drug agents remained absolutely crucial.
Oh, yeah. They offered invaluable local knowledge and expertise in interpreting the gang's criminal lexicon.
With the stakes now national and potentially global, the task force realized they needed to break this second, more complex code, and they needed to do it immediately.
And this required merging technical surveillance with high-level street expertise.
That street expertise came in the form of Lieutenant Fred Weed,
A Chicago police officer specializing in observation and intelligence methods who had extensive prior experience dealing with El Rukin members on the ground. His specific assignment was to lead the observation team, tasked with validating the wiretap information through intensive, continuous physical surveillance of the high-ranking members in contact with Ford.
They needed to see the coded action in the real world.
Exactly.
And the method they used to crack this second, more complex code is truly one of the most incredible pieces of detective work in the entire case. Can you tell us about the newspaper trick?
It's amazing. There was an intercepted phone call where one of Ford's generals in Chicago was reading a newspaper article to Ford, who was still in Texas.
Just reading the daily paper over the phone.
But as the general read the article aloud, he meticulously replaced certain specific terms, phrases, and locations with the new set of complex code words.
So if the actual newspaper article said, "Police raided a home on 55th Street," the general might read, "The generals visited the Black Hat on the River Road."
Precisely. By diligently cross-referencing that recorded conversation with the actual newspaper article, which in reality described a shooting incident between homeowners and neighbors on the south side of Chicago, the agents were able to literally translate the code words line by line.
So this wasn't just simple word association.
No, it was contextual replacement. It allowed them to build a comprehensive, reliable glossary for the gang's entire lexicon. They had regained their Rosetta Stone.
And with the code finally cracked, the daily conversations naturally covered the normal drug business, the turf wars, and the general's reporting to Ford. But crucially, the translations now confirmed the entire central conspiracy.
A joint plot that was underway and accelerating with the Libyan government.
What's terrifying is that the monitored conversations confirmed that some El Rukin members had already traveled to Libya.
This wasn't just a discussion. The relationship was actively established and operational. But the threat assessment grew dramatically sharper in April 1986 due to an external event happening thousands of miles away.
Right, we're talking about the bombing of Transworld Airlines Flight 840, traveling from Rome to Athens.
Which tragically killed 4 Americans and injured many others. The FBI strongly suspected that the Libyan government, specifically Muammar Gaddafi, was directly responsible for that act of terror.
And the parallel to El Rukin's stated goal became sickeningly clear.
Yes. That TWA bombing established a deadly benchmark, and just 2 days after the TWA attack, the surveillance captured a chilling, critical conversation between Jeff Ford and one of his generals, Melvin Ma.
And they were explicitly discussing the details of the explosion.
Right, and Ma, it's like he was boasting to Ford, explicitly stated that El Rukin could execute a similar attack, benchmarked against the devastation of TWA Flight 840 within the next 30 to 50 days.
That changed everything. The threat moved from abstract conspiracy and planning to imminent capability, tied to a specific, devastating, real-world act of terrorism. The clock was officially ticking, and the deadline was measured in weeks.
And Ford, recognizing the global attention following the TWA bombing, saw an urgent need to secure the financial backing he desperately craved from Libya. He became determined to convince the Libyan government that El Rukin's commitment and lethality were real, not just talk.
To do this, He needed to send a high-level delegation. He ordered two of his most trusted generals, Lean McAnderson and Rico Crenshaw, to travel abroad immediately to meet with the Libyans.
Their mission was basically a sales pitch for terrorism. They were selling their organization as a viable, deadly asset inside the U.S.
And they weren't going empty-handed to this meeting.
Not at all. Surveillance revealed that the gang had meticulously collected newspaper clippings detailing El Rukin's most violent and successful criminal activities, including the turf war murders. They planned to use these clippings as a literal portfolio to demonstrate their strike power.
To convince the Libyans that they were the perfect organization needed to carry out terrorist aims within the United States.
But the U.S. had recently taken decisive military action against Libya. Both El Rukin and the Libyans were keenly aware that Libya itself was under extremely close scrutiny and surveillance.
So the meeting location had to change for security reasons.
That's when the new location emerged, Panama. They referred to Panama using the operational codename Straw Hat.
And this geographical shift, it really demonstrates that El Rukin was learning international tradecraft very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. Panama was chosen due to its political neutrality and distance from known U.S. surveillance networks targeting the Middle East.
So the task force knew that losing sight of McAnderson and Crenshaw meant losing the thread of the entire conspiracy. On May 3, 1986, the generals left the HQ.
And a continuous physical observation team shadowed them every step of the way, from Chicago to Miami and then all the way down to Panama. This is a costly, high-risk surveillance operation crossing multiple international borders.
And in Panama City, the relentless surveillance paid off.
Instantly and definitively. The two generals were spotted entering the Libyan embassy. This confirmed, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were meeting with legitimate, high-level government officials, solidifying the state-sponsored aspect of this conspiracy.
So when the generals returned on May 10th, the FBI was ready. Working closely with U.S. Customs, a thorough search of the generals and their luggage was ordered upon re-entry.
And this yielded the defining physical piece of evidence that moved the needle from suspicion to concrete conspiracy proof. During the search of Rico Crenshaw's suitcase, security found a document written in his own handwriting.
In a moment of high tension, agents secretly copied the document before Crenshaw could realize it had been discovered and compromised.
And the contents were they were absolutely staggering. This wasn't about drug ambition anymore. This was explicit political subversion. The document detailed that El Rukin maintained 5 organized terrorist cells operating within the U.S.
And their stated goal, written by Crenshaw himself, was to actively weaken the U.S. government.
The intelligence was then immediately validated by the wiretaps the very next day, May 11th. Agents intercepted conversations confirming the Panama mission's success. The Libyans had agreed to the requested financing. The transaction was set to happen through a Panama bank facilitated by an attorney they had met during the visit.
So everything was moving forward.
Yes.
So they had the recorded conversations, the confirmed meetings at an embassy, and a document outlining their subversive terrorist intent. Yet despite all this alarming intelligence, the task force still faced a monumental legal hurdle.
They lacked the necessary proof of intent to commit an actual, actionable terrorist crime that would stick in court. Conspiracy is one thing.
Physical proof of action or commitment is another entirely.
Exactly. They needed unambiguous proof that the terrorist intentions weren't just the boastful claims of a street gang trying to impress foreign financiers, but that they were serious, actionable, and imminent.
They had to demonstrate they were serious about carrying out these attacks, or they risked seeing the entire complex, costly case just crumble on legal grounds.
And the price of failure was a terrorist attack on American soil.
So by June, the intelligence suggested a terrifying escalation of intent that truly panicked the agents. Cord was discussing sending El Rukin members to Libya, specifically to learn bomb-making techniques.
Right, planning for them to return to the U.S. and train others. Preparation was becoming active.
But here's where the narrative takes a turn, fueled by criminal paranoia and finance. Weeks went by, and the promised Libyan money hadn't arrived through the Panama pipeline.
So Ford, desperate to prove his capabilities and earn the respect, and, more importantly, the funds of the Libyans, he became frantic. He feared they were losing credibility.
In early July, Ford's desperation reached a critical peak. The wiretaps captured him talking about taking immediate action to demonstrate El Rukin's effectiveness, attacking a government building, blowing up a plane.
And even using military-grade rockets. This radical shift in ambition from planning to immediate execution was the trigger the task force needed. They knew they had to control the situation immediately before Ford went outside their surveillance network.
Their solution was audacious and incredibly risky.
The FBI would become El Rukin's sole, designated supplier of military-grade gear. They introduced an undercover operator, Special Agent Willie Hahn, who also used the name Yulin. He was a veteran of the Drug Task Force with extensive experience in navigating high-stakes street drug deals.
So Yulin was tasked with arranging a new drug transaction with a high-ranking member, Alan Knox, who was known to be privy to Ford's broader terrorist-focused plans.
And during this drug deal, Yulin would drop a crucial, calculated hint.
He mentioned, just casually, having contacts who could smuggle weapons and military equipment straight from a military base.
And Knox immediately showed explosive interest, instantly confirming the agent's suspicion that Ford was already actively seeking this military-grade hardware. Yulin was the perfect choice for this. He was calm, structured, and he knew the rules of the street gangs.
Knox then explicitly described the weapon the gang wanted. He didn't ask for a machine gun, he asked for an anti-tank weapon.
Specifying the thing Clint Eastwood had in that movie?
That instantly narrows the field.
The agents knew immediately what he meant. He was describing the M72 law, a shoulder-fired, single-shot anti-tank weapon used primarily by the U.S. Army against armored vehicles.
It's capable of destroying tanks, bunkers, government buildings, or even low-flying aircraft with a deadly range of up to 200 meters.
The request just confirmed the severity of Ford's planned attacks. It made it clear this wasn't just about drugs anymore. It was about full-scale, military-level confrontation.
And the overriding consensus among all law enforcement partners was clear and absolute. They could not, under any circumstance, allow El Rukin to obtain a live M72 law or any functional military equivalent.
From any source, including their own undercover operation. This demanded a complex, high-stakes sting.
Agent Yulin negotiated the price, a high-end price of $2,200 per unit, paid in cash.
And crucially, the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, was brought in to custom build the perfect trap. They constructed a flawless dummy M72.
Identical in weight, appearance, and operation.
But containing zero explosives, zero propellant, completely inert.
But the ATF added one critical detail for the surveillance team that was essential for their safety and the integrity of the operation.
They installed a sophisticated miniature radio transmitter inside the dummy weapon. This meant the weapon could be tracked constantly, regardless of where the gang moved or stored it.
So the weapon was ready, the trap was set.
And given El Rukin's verified ties to international terrorism and their explicit intent to commit domestic attacks, the FBI deemed the extraordinarily high risk of an undercover transaction involving military hardware absolutely necessary. The operation, codenamed the Lansing Sting, was scheduled for a hotel in Lansing, a quiet location roughly 30 kilometers outside Chicago.
Providing a controlled environment away from the gang's main territory.
Exactly.
The night of July 31st, 1986, must have felt electric with tension. The hotel in Lansing was saturated with law enforcement personnel. This was no routine drug bust.
No. We're talking about over 50 agents from the FBI, ATF, DEA, and Chicago police deployed strategically.
The tactical deployment was designed for 100% control. Surveillance teams were deployed within a 4-block radius. Agents were in adjacent hotel rooms, on every floor, across the halls.
And SWAT teams were placed on high standby, ready to execute an immediate, overwhelming response. The primary objective was the safety of the public, preventing innocent citizens from being caught in potential crossfire if the deal went south.
Alan Knox and Melvin Ma arrived at the hotel to meet Agent Yulin. The negotiations began, monitored via the wiretap. However, Jeff Ford, even from his Texas prison cell, was notoriously paranoid.
And that paranoia nearly compromised the entire operation.
Ford ordered Ma to delay. Ma left the hotel room abruptly and drove back toward the HQ to call Ford directly, bypassing the monitored lines.
Ford feared losing a general to an undercover agent, or worse, having them arrested while carrying a high-value item. He instructed Ma to send a lower-ranking, more expendable accomplice to deliver the money and retrieve the M72,
reducing the risk to his top command. The exchange finally went smoothly. The accomplice took the M72 dummy, believing it to be a live, devastating weapon of war, and headed back towards Chicago on the Dan Ryan Expressway.
And multiple surveillance units immediately picked up the chase.
And this is precisely where the continuous visual observation proved absolutely vital, validating the need for that large team.
The high-speed pursuit suddenly became tense when the driver, the accomplice, stopped unexpectedly on the expressway. Melvin Ma pulled up alongside.
The driver was having car trouble.
In a flash, the M72 was transferred from the accomplice's disabled car into Ma's vehicle.
A crucial, unscripted detail. Had the FBI relied solely on the tracking device, they would have just seen the M72 moving. They wouldn't have known the critical chain of custody had changed hands.
Right. Ma then drove the M72 directly to a residential block on South Canwood Avenue, just a few kilometers from the main El Rucan HQ. The gang referred to this unassuming building as their armory,
And the radio transmitter confirmed the M72 was now inside that armory building.
which was described in intelligence reports as a heavily guarded location with a basement infested by rats and cockroaches. Surveillance was established around the clock, but the agents knew the clock was ticking down to zero.
Over the next few tense days, Ford's paranoia subsided, replaced by sheer exhilaration at the acquisition of this powerful weapon. Wiretaps captured him ordering 5 more units.
And stating explicitly with dangerous finality, we buy more and then we try one out.
And the wiretaps also revealed the chilling target of this planned test.
A specific Chicago police detective from the gang unit who had been a major thorn in El Rucan's sight for years. Ford planned to use the M72 to brutally assassinate the detective, both as revenge and as proof of capability for the Libyans.
This was the absolute point of no return for the legal team and the agents. They agreed unanimously. They could not risk letting the gang attempt to test the M72.
If they attempted to fire it, they would immediately discover it was a dummy, exposing Agent Ulan and the entire covert operation.
And worse, it would send the entire organization scrambling to find a real M72 from another source, potentially setting off a successful terrorist attack.
Given their explicit goal of domestic terrorism for Libyan money, the risk of a real M72 falling into El Rucan's hands was catastrophic. They had sufficient evidence for weapons trafficking and conspiracy, even if the terrorism charges were still legally tenuous.
So the decision was made. They had to strike immediately, before the gang could pivot and acquire a live rocket launcher, and before that detective was murdered.
The decision was executed swiftly. On the morning of August 5th, the task force launched simultaneous, highly coordinated raids on both the Fortress headquarters and the South Canwood Armory building.
The HQ proved exactly as tough as Anthony Sumner had described, a true fortress. Agents had to use specialized cutting torches to gain access through the reinforced steel doors.
At the main entrance, rear entrance, and internally. And inside one of the command offices, they found crucial, irrefutable evidence tying them to the international plot. Travel documents booked in the names of McAnderson and Crenshaw, listing Libya as their past destination.
But the immediate challenge, and the moment of most profound tension, lay at the South Canwood Armory. The search for the M72 began immediately. Agents combed the complex, checking every room floor by floor.
For a frustrating, agonizing half hour in that complex, high-risk environment, the search yielded absolutely nothing. The fear was rising. Had the gang moved the M72 again?
Finally, in the grimy, rat-infested basement, the detector they had carried in began to alert them to the presence of metal.
The signal grew stronger, localizing under a staircase. Agents worked furiously, ripping off the wooden paneling under the stairs, and there, exactly where Ma had left it, they found the dummy M72 law.
And it wasn't an isolated find. Alongside the dummy rocket launcher, they discovered an astounding cache of firepower hidden away.
35 other automatic weapons, including various submachine guns, military-grade rifles, and high-capacity magazines. This was the armory of an organization preparing for war, not just criminal turf wars, but potentially political war against the U.S. government.
The arrests were decisive. Jeff Ford, still in his Texas prison cell, was served with the new indictment. Alan Knox, Rico Crenshaw, and Lean McAnderson were taken into custody.
However, one key player, General Melvin Ma, the individual who had discussed the TWA bombing, managed to slip away and went into hiding. He became one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted for nearly 9 agonizing years.
The charges laid against the captured members were extensive, spanning across state and international lines, including conspiracy, illegal weapons possession, and misuse of interstate facilities for criminal purposes.
And the trial and convictions began in 1987, bringing the full, horrifying story of El Rucan's ambition into the light. The sentences reflected the gravity of their intentions and the scale of the conspiracy. McAnderson and Crenshaw, the travelers to Panama and the authors of the plot document, each received sentences of over 50 years.
And Jeff Ford, already serving 13 years.
Received a brutal additional 80 years added to his existing sentence. Melvin Ma was finally caught in 1995 and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms.
This case is far more than just a major drug bust. It holds immense, terrifying historical significance. The El Rukin case was the first instance in which U.S. citizens were actually convicted for attempting terrorist attacks on behalf of a foreign government.
Essentially betraying their own country for drug profits and foreign sponsorship, it was a shocking revelation that street crime and state-sponsored terror had collided.
For the Chicago police, it decimated one of the city's most dangerous street gangs.
And for the FBI, it was a profound early success in the fight against international terrorism, finding a willing, organized foothold domestically. It taught the Bureau a hard lesson: never underestimate the global reach of local criminal ambition.
So, if we look back at this incredible deep dive, it started with a local effort to fight crippling drug violence and unexpectedly morphed into a stunning, high-stakes counterterrorism success. It highlights the terrifying, often unpredictable, interconnectedness of seemingly disparate criminal activities.
The El Rukin case demonstrates a critical reality. Low-level criminal ambition, driven purely by the pursuit of profit and absolute control, can lead an organization to actively seek alliances with state sponsors of terrorism when the financial rewards are high enough.
And the key difference between investigating a conspiracy and preventing an actual attack lies entirely in intelligence gathering.
Yes, the painstaking wiretaps, the rigorous code breaking, and the willingness of agents to put themselves in harm's way during the Lansing sting.
It's truly a chilling final thought. The true cost of the El Rukin case wasn't just the drug trade they disrupted, but the realization that U.S. street gangs, brutal organizations focused only on profit, could become viable, willing assets for foreign powers seeking to sow chaos domestically.
If one of the most dangerous street gangs in Chicago was ready to commit domestic terrorism, to blow up a plane, or murder a detective with a military rocket launcher, all for a foreign financial payoff, what other groups might also be willing to betray their country for the right price?
That question is something worth exploring long after you stop listening.